What was your philosophy when you first realized you could have a philosophy about the intersection of brand and culture and narrative that you're speaking about? And then how has that evolved as you've gone through Web 2, I guess we could call it, but non-Web 3 ventures and then into Web 3?
Yeah. So I think where my perspective started even before I knew really what advertising was realizing that there is two parties to this communication. There's a company who has a motive, and then an audience who is being presented with said motive. And in between that space is where good brands are built. It's built on empathy. It's built on curiosity about the person that's listening to whatever you're trying to sell them. And it's about courage to do something unique that stands out. Those are kind of my three principles. That has been better defined over the past few years, but it hasn't really been how it started. It started out with just thinking like, why are brands talking to me right now? What are they trying to sell me? How am I going to understand what it is they're trying to sell? Are they doing a good job of it? And then when I started to realize the nuts and bolts of what goes into a marketing campaign and understanding that relationship that I just mentioned a little bit better, that's where I started to define it a bit more as an empathetic relationship that you really start to focus on. I mean, my entire career has been focused on thinking about the end user. Like, I try to keep the end user in mind, and I try to reach them in creative ways. That's how my philosophy kind of boils down. And when you go through Web 2, you have a lot of traditional goals and KPIs that brands hadn't been used to changing for a long time. But when you started to introduce things like social media and you started to understand more about community building or always on communication, it really changed the relationship between brands. So that was a big shift that I saw as an opportunity to kind of put my focus into as someone who loved the internet, who loved internet culture. I was able to help find that empathy between internet users and brands. As we start to think about Web3, the incentive structure starts to shift a little bit more. Brands held a lot of power in early Web 2. It was kind of just like a shouting at you. And in the same way that TV and radio was, it's like, you're going to hear this. There is no talk back.
Right.
Web 2 evolved to be more of a conversation where, brands had to meet users in the middle somewhere so that their incentives aligned. They're having a conversation they both want to have, and that turns into, follows, engagement, etc. Web3, we build on it even more, where the power completely shifts, where all of a sudden you have people who are board members of these brands that then are telling the story for the brand and become such a core aspect of the brand that you can't discern between the two. So I think it's really interesting to start to think about how ownership plays a big role in the next phase of branding. I think you see it a lot with a lot of NFT projects, like Bored Ape or Doodles, or Cool Cats. People's identities are wrapped up in the brand itself, almost that you can't tell the difference. And I think it's really clear with those because of the cultural impact that it's had. It's a great art. It's like strong communities, that sort of thing. I'm not sure what that looks like yet for a brand that's trying to sell something that's a little bit more traditional, like consumer packaged goods or some sort of software as a service. I think that we're still trying to figure that part out, and that's an interesting challenge to solve.
It is. I keep thinking of SaaS PFPs. I don't know why.
Dude, it'll happen. Like, think about how I think one of the best examples of this are projects like DUIDX having hedgies. Like that's pretty close to what we're talking about, where it's a membership as a part of using this tool that then is unlocking even more benefits. It's like paying for LinkedIn Premium, but having skin in the game on the upside.
Yep. Being able to use the solution. It's like, I think in the past, at least in my experience, I have some experience in B2B SaaS sales and legal side. And you always had a community, right? But like it always felt kind of forced, right? It was kind of like,
Right.
hey, if I can help you better your career, maybe you get certified in my product, and then you become, you join these like active, message boards that we have somewhere, and like you might talk to each other, but there's always just kind of like tension between the brand and the community. Now
Right.
in Web3, the brand is the community,
Right.
right?
Yeah. I think that tension is interesting that you bring up, because going back, it's like the tension is about, okay, what are your motives here? Like it's incentive alignment. It's unclear motives on like, well, why are you wanting to get me involved in this way? Everything feels like a veiled sales pitch. But when you own the brand by owning NFTs, the engagement feels much lighter. We see it in the jump community that we started, even without like, we do have an NFT membership pass, but we also have a jump token, which is not a liquid token, but is used to like tip people. And just as they engage, as they share something valuable, we have these jump tokens. And even that little bit of incentive has made people immediately jump into action and start to work on different solutions that the community might need, because they feel ownership of it. They feel the power. And I mean, honestly, that's exactly why we created Jump, was so that we had this sandbox for people who are getting into Web3 and our marketers to come and try different strategies, to practice with, token gated discords and NFT launch mechanics and tokenomics, if you say that. But yeah, it's interesting to see how when you start to align motives and the incentives are clear for participation, there's a psychological switch that happens with people, where it's less like what you were just saying, where, oh, what are you trying to sell me by giving me this free course, or like taking me out to dinner? Like everybody knows there's a show at the end of this that you have to sit through. It's like it's like the timeshare sales pitch at the end of staying at a resort, but with Web3 and the way that we've already seen it start to play out, people immediately go, oh, the whole thing, I don't need to be sold on anything. I'm already in. I'm an owner. You're pitching me as an owner to participate more, as a board member, as a key investor. Like that's a big change in how people see the communities they participate in. And we've seen it already